Whose house is this?
Mine. I live here.
Is there a problem, officer? I need to see some ID.
Can I ask why? I'm standing in my own driveway.
This decorated intelligence officer made one mistake. She came home while being black. Officer Kyle Brennan thought he had an easy arrest, a woman who didn't fit his idea of who belonged in this neighborhood. He had the badge, the gun, and the authority. What he didn't have was any idea who he was dealing with. And that miscalculation would cost him everything. Before we continue, let me take this opportunity to thank you so much for supporting our channel. Just choosing to watch our video means a lot to us. Before we go any further, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this is your first time here. Dr. Imani Clarke had just finished a classified briefing at Fort Meade. 27 years with the National Security Agency, clearances most people don't even know exist. She'd briefed presidents, coordinated with foreign intelligence services, and helped prevent threats the public would never hear about. Now she was pulling into her driveway in a quiet Maryland suburb at 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. She didn't see the patrol car slow down behind her. Officer Kyle Brennan had been on the force for 9 years. He'd received complaints before, nothing that stuck, nothing his union couldn't handle. He saw an older black woman getting out of a late-model sedan in front of a house worth over $600,000. Something didn't add up in his mind. He'd been trained to trust his instincts, and his instincts told him this woman didn't belong here. He activated his lights. Imani was reaching for her briefcase when she saw the flash of red and blue reflecting off her garage door. She turned slowly, patient. This wasn't her first encounter with law enforcement. She knew the routine. Stay calm, be respectful, explain clearly. She'd given her own daughter this talk years ago. Brennan approached with his hand near his weapon. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't ask if she needed help. "Whose house is this?" he said. Imani looked at him carefully. She was tired. The briefing had run long. She had reports to review before tomorrow morning. "Mine," she said. "I live here. Is there a problem, officer?" Brennan's jaw tightened. He didn't like her tone. He heard confidence where he expected deference. "I need to see some ID," he said. "Can I ask why?" Imani said. "I'm standing in my own driveway." That was the moment everything changed. Brennan heard challenge. He heard disrespect. He took a step closer. "I'm not asking again. ID now." Imani felt something shift in her chest. Not fear exactly, something colder. Recognition. She'd seen this before. She knew how this could go. But she also knew her rights, and she was done being treated like a suspect in her own life. Imani Clarke had purchased this house in 2011. She'd saved for years, worked weekends, missed family gatherings. She remembered the day she got the keys. Her daughter had cried. Her mother had prayed. This house represented everything she'd built from nothing. Now a police officer was demanding proof she belonged here. "Officer, I've just come from work," Imani said. Her voice was steady, professional. "My identification is inside the house, if you'll allow me to retrieve it." "Stay right where you are," Brennan cut her off. "Don't move." He was radioing dispatch now, requesting backup. Imani heard him describe her as uncooperative and possibly trespassing. She felt her stomach drop. This was escalating for no reason. A neighbor across the street, Patricia Chen, was watching from her window. She'd lived next to Imani for 8 years. They traded recipes. Their kids had played together. Patricia grabbed her phone and started recording. "Officer, I don't understand what's happening," Imani said. "I've told you this is my home. My name is Dr. Imani Clarke. I work for the federal government. If you check the property records—" "I don't care where you work. You're being detained for investigation." "Investigation of what?" Imani's voice rose slightly. 27 years of composure starting to crack. "I haven't committed a crime. I'm standing in my driveway." Brennan moved closer. His hand was on his belt now, not on his weapon, but close enough. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," he said. Imani stared at him. This couldn't be real. She'd coordinated operations in 3 different countries. She'd sat across from senators and generals. She had a security clearance that required background checks most people couldn't even imagine. And now she was being ordered to put her hands behind her back in front of her own home. "You're arresting me," she said quietly. "Turn around, now." Patricia was running across the street now. She was still filming. "Officer, that's Dr. Clarke. She lives here. I'm her neighbor." Brennan spun toward Patricia. "Ma'am, step back or you'll be arrested too." Patricia stopped but kept filming. Her hands were shaking. Imani made a decision. She could resist. She could demand a supervisor. She could make this harder. But she'd seen the videos. She knew how these encounters ended for people who looked like her. So she did what she'd spent a lifetime learning to do. She complied. She turned around. She put her hands behind her back. The metal cuffs closed around her wrists. Tight. Too tight. She winced but didn't say anything. Brennan walked her to his patrol car. He put his hand on her head and pushed her into the back seat. Like she was a criminal, like she was dangerous. Imani sat in the back of that police car and looked at her house through the window, the house she'd worked so hard for. The roses she planted last spring were blooming by the mailbox. Her daughter's old basketball hoop was still mounted above the garage door. A second patrol car arrived, then a third. Officers were talking to Brennan, checking the house. Patricia was still filming, still trying to explain. Nobody was listening to her. Inside that police car, Imani wasn't crying. She was calculating. She was thinking about protocol, about rights, about the chain of command that would need to be informed if a federal intelligence officer was arrested. She was thinking about the lawyers she knew, the colleagues who'd been waiting for her call about tomorrow's meeting. She was thinking about her daughter, who would see this. Her mother, who'd warned her that no amount of education or success would protect her from this. And she was thinking about Officer Kyle Brennan, who had no idea what he'd just done. Brennan spent 20 minutes searching for a reason to justify what he'd already done. He ran Imani's plates. Clean. He checked for outstanding warrants. None. He called for a supervisor, but framed it as routine procedure for an arrest, not as a request for guidance on whether he should be making an arrest at all. Imani sat in the back of that police car, watching her life become a spectacle. More neighbors were coming out now. Some were filming, others were arguing with the officers. Nobody could believe what they were seeing. Sergeant Linda Vasquez arrived 30 minutes later. She was a 20-year veteran. She'd seen bad arrests before. She could smell them. This one reeked. "What do we have?" Vasquez asked Brennan. "Suspicious person call. Subject was uncooperative, refused to provide identification, became verbally aggressive." Vasquez looked at Imani through the window. A woman in her 60s wearing a business suit, sitting calmly with her hands cuffed behind her back. This didn't look like aggression. This looked like patience. "Did you run her ID?" Vasquez asked Brennan. "She refused to provide it." "Did you check the property records?" Brennan hesitated. "I was in the process." "So you arrested a woman in front of a house without confirming whether she lives there?" Vasquez's voice was flat, dangerous. Patricia Chan pushed forward. She was still filming. "Sergeant, I'm her neighbor. That's Dr. Clarke. She's lived here for over a decade. She works for the NSA at Fort Meade. This is insane." Vasquez closed her eyes briefly. NSA. Federal employee. This was about to become a nightmare. She walked to the police car and opened the door. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Vasquez. I apologize for this situation. Can you tell me your name?" "Dr. Imani Clarke. I live at this address. I've lived here since 2011. My identification is inside my home, along with my federal credentials. I work for the National Security Agency at Fort Meade. I was returning from a classified briefing when your officer decided I didn't belong in my own driveway." Vasquez felt her stomach turn. "Dr. Clarke,
I'm going to remove these handcuffs. This shouldn't have happened. But it did happen. It's still happening. I'm still sitting in the back of a police car in front of my home while my neighbors film this. My colleagues at the agency are probably wondering why I haven't checked in. My daughter is going to see this video online. So yes, Sergeant, this happened. Vasquez removed the cuffs. Imani's wrists were red, marked. She rubbed them slowly.
I need to see your identification to complete the report, Vasquez said. May I accompany you inside? Imani nodded. They walked to her front door together. Brennan stayed by his patrol car. He was watching them. His jaw was tight. He knew this was going bad. Inside, Imani retrieved her wallet and her NSA credentials. The badge was heavy, official. It had her photo, her clearance level, her access codes. Vasquez looked at it and felt her career flash before her eyes. Dr. Clarke, Vasquez said carefully, I need to ask, do you want to file a formal complaint? Imani looked at her, really looked at her. Vasquez seemed sincere, maybe even apologetic, but sincerity didn't undo what had happened. Apologies didn't remove the feeling of those handcuffs, the humiliation, the fear. Yes, Imani said, I do. Within an hour, the story was spreading. Patricia's video had already been shared 200 times. A federal intelligence officer arrested in her own driveway, handcuffed, detained, for the crime of coming home. By evening, it had 20,000 shares. By midnight, it was national news. The NSA's Office of General Counsel received a notification at 11 p.m. One of their senior intelligence officers had been arrested by local police. Protocol required an immediate review. Security implications, potential compromise. They needed to know everything. Brennan's body cam footage was pulled, reviewed, analyzed. The department watched him approach Imani without cause, demand identification without justification, escalate without reason, arrest without evidence. His supervisor watched the footage twice, then called the chief. The chief watched it once, then called the city attorney. The city attorney watched it and immediately knew they were going to be sued, and they were going to lose. The video went viral Tuesday night. By Wednesday morning, it had 15 million views. News networks were running it on loop. Civil rights organizations were issuing statements. The hashtag Justice for Imani was trending nationwide. The police department tried damage control. They released a statement calling it an unfortunate misunderstanding and promising a full investigation. But the body cam footage told a different story. There was no misunderstanding. There was only profiling. Imani didn't watch the news coverage. She didn't read the comments. She sat in her living room with her daughter Zara, who'd driven up from Virginia the moment she heard. Mom, you need a lawyer. A good one, Zara said. I know, Imani said. She'd already made calls. By Thursday, she had representation. Attorney Benjamin Okafor specialized in civil rights cases. He'd won settlements against 3 different police departments. He took one look at the footage and knew this was different. This wasn't just another bad arrest. This was a federal intelligence officer with an impeccable record, a woman who dedicated her life to national security, humiliated in front of her neighbors because one cop couldn't imagine a black woman belonging in a nice house. They're going to settle, Okafor told Imani during their first meeting, but we're not settling. We're going to trial. Why? Imani asked. Because settlements come with silence. They pay you to go away, to sign an NDA, to let everyone forget this happened. But you don't want this forgotten, do you? Imani thought about that. She thought about every black professional who'd been pulled over for driving too nice a car, every black family questioned for being in their own neighborhood, every black child who learned too early that success didn't equal safety. No, Imani said, I don't want it forgotten. The investigation into Officer Brennan moved quickly, too quickly for his comfort. Internal Affairs pulled his records. They found complaints he thought had been buried. A traffic stop in 2019
where he'd searched a vehicle without consent, a domestic disturbance call in 2021 where a black family accused him of aggression, a pattern of escalation, a pattern of profiling. None of it had been enough to discipline him before. His union had protected him. His supervisors had looked the other way. But now the spotlight was on. Now there were cameras. Now there was a federal intelligence officer with resources and determination. Brennan's lawyer told him to stay quiet. Don't talk to the press. Don't post on social media. Don't make it worse. But Brennan couldn't help himself. He gave an interview to a friendly podcast. He said he'd been doing his job, following his training, protecting the neighborhood. He said Imani had been uncooperative, that she had escalated the situation, that he had no choice.
The NSA conducted its own review. They needed to determine if Imani's security clearance had been compromised, if classified information had been at risk, if there were protocols that needed updating. They interviewed her for 6 hours. They reviewed her service record, 27 years without incident. Commendations from directors, letters of appreciation from allied intelligence services. She'd worked on operations that had saved lives, prevented attacks, defended the country most people took for granted. The review concluded she'd done nothing wrong. Her clearance remained intact, but the psychological evaluation was concerning. She was showing signs of stress, anxiety, hypervigilance, the kind of trauma that came from being treated like a criminal in your own home. The agency offered her counseling, medical leave, whatever she needed. But what Imani needed was something they couldn't provide. She needed her dignity back. She needed the world to know this wasn't acceptable. She needed Officer Kyle Brennan to face consequences. By the following Monday, the city had made its decision. They offered a settlement, $300,000, a public apology, retraining for all officers. It was more than most departments offered. They hoped it would be enough. Okafor called Imani with the offer. He already knew what she'd say. "Turn it down," she said. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm sure," she said. "I want a courtroom. I want testimony. I want a jury to hear what happened and decide if this is the country we want to be." Okafor smiled. He'd been hoping she'd say that. The case moved to federal court. Civil rights violation, unlawful arrest, emotional distress. Okafor was asking for damages, real damages, the kind that made departments think twice before letting officers like Brennan patrol their streets. He was asking for $1.2 million. The trial began on a cold morning in February. The courthouse was packed. Journalists filled the gallery. Civil rights activists stood outside with signs. This wasn't just about Imani Clarke anymore. This was about every person who'd ever been told they didn't belong. Brennan sat at the defense table in a suit that looked uncomfortable on him. He'd been suspended without pay. His union was covering the legal fees, but they'd made it clear this was his last lifeline. If he lost, he was on his own. Imani sat across the aisle with Okafor. She wore a navy suit. Her hair was pulled back. She looked every bit the intelligence professional she was. Calm, composed, ready. The plaintiff's case took 3 days. Okafor started with the body cam footage. The jury watched in silence. They saw Brennan approach without cause, demand identification without justification, ignore Patricia's explanations, cuff Imani like she was dangerous. One juror, an older white woman, wiped her eyes during the footage. Another, a young black man, shook his head slowly. Okafor called Patricia Chen to the stand. She described what she'd witnessed, how she'd tried to explain, how Brennan had threatened to arrest her, too. "Did Dr. Clarke do anything that day that seemed criminal to you?" Okafor asked. "She came home from work. That's all. She came home." He called Sergeant Vasquez. She testified reluctantly. She didn't want to end Brennan's career, but she wouldn't lie under oath. "When you arrived on scene, did you observe Dr. Clarke behaving aggressively?"
Okafor asked. No, Vasquez said. Did you observe her resisting arrest? No. Did you see any evidence that justified Officer Brennan's actions? Vasquez paused. She looked at Brennan, then back at Okafor. No, I did not. The defense tried to salvage what they could. Brennan's attorney argued he'd been following protocol, that he'd perceived a threat, that split-second decisions in law enforcement were difficult. But the body cam footage destroyed that narrative. There was no threat, there was no urgency. There was only a cop who saw a black woman and assumed she didn't belong. Then Imani took the stand. Okafor walked her through that day, the briefing, the drive home, the moment she saw those lights. What went through your mind when Officer Brennan asked whose house it was? Okafor asked.
I thought he must be confused, Imani said. I thought maybe there had been a burglary nearby, so I told him it was mine. And when he demanded ID, I was surprised. But I've learned to comply. I've taught my daughter to comply. So I explained where my ID was and offered to retrieve it. What happened next? Imani's voice wavered slightly. He told me not to move. He called for backup. He treated me like I was a criminal, in my own driveway, in front of my neighbors, in front of the home I worked 20 years to afford. Can you describe how the handcuffs felt? Tight, Imani said quietly. Too tight. They left marks, but that's not the part that hurt the most. What hurt the most? Imani looked directly at the jury. Knowing that no matter what I'd achieved, no matter how hard I'd worked, no matter how much I'd sacrificed for this country, none of it mattered to him. He looked at me and saw someone who didn't belong. That's what hurt. The courtroom was silent. Okafor introduced Imani's service record, letters from the NSA directors, commendations, citations. He showed the jury who she really was. Not a threat, not a criminal, a patriot who'd spent her life protecting people who would never know her name. He called an expert on racial profiling, a psychologist who testified about the long-term effects of discriminatory policing, the hypervigilance, the anxiety, the way it changed how you moved through the world. Then came the defense's turn. Brennan took the stand. His attorney tried to paint him as a dedicated officer making a tough call, but under cross-examination, Okafor dismantled him. Officer Brennan, how many white homeowners have you stopped and questioned in their own driveways? I don't keep track. Estimate for us. I can't say. Is it 0? Brennan shifted. I respond to suspicious activity irregardless of race. What was suspicious about Dr. Clarke arriving at her home at 3 in the afternoon? She seemed out of place. Out of place in a $600,000 home, a home she owns? What exactly seemed out of place, Officer Brennan? Brennan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The jury had already figured it out. Okafor pulled up Brennan's complaint history. The 2019 traffic stop, the 2021 domestic call. He showed the pattern. He showed the system that had protected Brennan until now. How many chances does an officer get before someone holds him accountable? Okafor asked. The defense objected. The judge sustained. But the question hung in the air. Closing arguments came on day 5. The defense asked for understanding, for empathy, for recognition of how difficult police work was. Okafor asked for justice. He reminded the jury that justice wasn't abstract. It was concrete. It was a black woman being allowed to exist in her own home without suspicion. It was an officer facing consequences when he violated someone's rights. It was a system that finally said enough. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. The jury came back at 4:30 in the afternoon. The foreman was a middle-aged man who'd worked in construction for 30 years. He'd seen discrimination. He knew what it looked like. The judge asked for the verdict. In the matter of Clarke versus Brennan and the City Police Department, on the count of civil rights violation, we find in favor of the plaintiff. Imani exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. On the count of unlawful arrest, we find in favor of the plaintiff. Zara reached for her mother's hand. On the count of emotional distress, we find in favor of the plaintiff. Brennan stared straight ahead. His face was blank, empty.
The judge read the damages, $1.2 million. The jury had given Okafor everything he'd asked for. They'd sent a message. This wasn't acceptable. This wouldn't be tolerated. Not anymore. The courtroom erupted in applause. The judge banged his gavel but didn't stop it immediately. He let it go for a few seconds. Even judges understood what this meant. Outside, the news cameras were waiting. Okafor gave a statement. Imani stood beside him, saying nothing, but her presence said everything. Today, a jury told Officer Brennan and every officer like him that you cannot profile people in their own neighborhoods, Okafor said. You cannot arrest people for existing while black. And if you do, there will be consequences, real consequences. The reporters shouted questions. Imani answered a few. "How do you feel?" one asked. "Tired," Imani said honestly, "but grateful. Grateful that 12 people saw the truth and acted on it." "What do you want people to take from this?" Imani thought carefully. "I want people to understand that this happens every day, to people who don't have my resources, who don't have cameras, who don't have lawyers. This wasn't just about me. This was about everyone who's been treated like they don't belong in spaces they've earned." The settlement wasn't just money. The city agreed to implement new policies, mandatory bias training, body camera requirements, a civilian review board with real authority. They'd resisted these reforms for years. Now they had no choice. Officer Kyle Brennan was terminated. His union tried to fight it, but gave up quickly. The publicity was too damaging. He appealed the verdict. The appeal was denied. He filed for bankruptcy 6 months later. The $1.2 million judgment would follow him for the rest of his life. He gave one final interview. He said he'd been doing his job, that he'd been hung out to dry, that the system had abandoned him. He never once apologized to Imani, never once acknowledged what he'd done wrong. Some people never learn. Imani returned to work at the NSA, but something had changed. She'd always kept her head down, done her job, stayed out of politics. Now she couldn't stay silent. She started speaking at conferences, writing op-eds, talking about what happened and why it mattered. She established a scholarship fund for young black students pursuing careers in intelligence and national security. She wanted them to know they belonged, that spaces weren't closed to them, that one bad cop couldn't define their worth. Her daughter Zara became an attorney, civil rights law. She said her mother had shown her what justice looked like when you refused to accept anything less. Patricia Chen still lives across the street. She and Imani have coffee every Sunday. They don't talk about that day anymore, but Patricia keeps the video saved just in case anyone ever forgets. The case became precedent. Clarke versus Brennan is now cited in civil rights lawsuits across the country. It's taught in law schools. It's referenced in police academies. It's a reminder that accountability isn't optional. 3 years later, Imani retired from the NSA. She'd given them 30 years. She'd earned her rest. At her retirement ceremony, the director gave a speech. He talked about her service, her dedication, her courage, not just in her work, but in standing up when she'd been wronged. Dr. Clarke could have taken the settlement and disappeared. Instead, she fought, and in fighting, she made this country a little more just. That's the definition of service. Imani stood in front of her colleagues and thought about that day in her driveway. The handcuffs, the humiliation, the fear. She thought about how close she'd come to just accepting it, moving on, staying quiet. She was glad she hadn't, because justice isn't something you wait for. It's something you demand. It's something you fight for, even when you're tired, even when the system tells you to be patient, even when people say you're making too much of it, especially then. So here's the question worth asking. How many Officer Brennans are still out there? How many people are sitting in the back of patrol cars right now wondering if anyone will believe them? How many stories never make it to court because people don't have the resources or the strength or the platform to fight back? And what are we doing about it? If this story moved you, if it made you think, drop a comment below. Tell us what justice means to you. And if you believe accountability matters, hit that like button and subscribe, because stories like this need to be told, they need to be heard, and they need to change things. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.